Well, the Saskatchewan Party has enjoyed 17 years in power, but recent polling by Insightrix suggests the gap between the NDP and the Sask Party is closing.
The change started to happen about a year ago where we had polling at 53% for the Sask Party, 39% for the NDP, and since then it's been contracting. And, I think it is a combination of time in office as well as some of the issues that we're facing here as we come into this next election.
So today on Blue Sky, we'll talk to former party insiders who will give us insight into what it's like for parties during a provincial election. And we also want to hear from you. What's the issue that's top of your mind as you figure out who to vote for later this month? You can call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, it is election season, and many of us in this province are following the action, but our guests today have a different perspective on campaign season. Both have been in the war rooms during elections. Nathaniel Cole worked for the NDP in the past. He is now with the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour, and he is in our Regina studio. Nathaniel, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me, Leisha.
And then we also have Samantha Yoholnitsky. Did I get that right, Samantha?
That's pretty good.
Pretty good? Yoholnitsky.
Yeah.
Sam has worked for the Saskatchewan Party in the past. She's now running the Saskatoon mayoral campaign for former Sask Party MLA Gord Wyant. Busy person, but you're with me here in our Saskatoon studio, which is great. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get too far, I want to pick up on some of the recent polling that we've been hearing about. So the latest polling data from CTV and Insightrix Research reveals some potential insight into the provincial election. We just heard that they're a pretty close race. So we know the Sask Party has been in power since 2007, but as of September, 49% of decided voters say they will support the Saskatchewan NDP. 48% of decided voters say they'd vote Sask Party. So that's pretty close. Lang McGilp is the Director of Research over at Insightrix, and he spoke to Saskatoon Morning host Stephanie Massicott.
The change started to happen about a year ago where we had polling at 53% for the Sask Party, 39% for the NDP, and since then it's been contracting. And, I think it is a combination of time in office as well as some of the issues that we're facing here as we come into this next election.
One of the questions you pose to voters is on whether it is time for change. What can you tell us about that?
That is a really interesting one. We have over half of Saskatchewan residents, 55% saying, yes, it's time for change, and only 25% saying, no, it isn't. And that leaves the remaining 22% saying, I'm just not so sure. And, where we see it really interesting is, so overall, that's half of people in this province thinking it's time for something new. But we broke that down demographically and by region, and we find that in pretty much all age groups and all regions, the biggest percentage of people, not necessarily over 50%, but the biggest percentage of people say, yes, it's time for a change.
What are the undecided voters saying in your polling?
So the undecided voters, which there are 33% of, which is a large number, and it's actually trended up in our more recent polling from July. It was 28%. So it's kind of going that upward level, which to me suggests that it's starting to get closer to making that decision as a voter. So people are doing a little bit more humming and hawing. But what really matters most to them is healthcare and the cost of living or inflation. Those are two key issues that affect the undecided voters.
So how has the momentum, changed here?
Well, like I said, it was last September where we had seen the Sask Party in the lead. And typically, we've been polling for, 15, 20 years or almost now. And historically, the Sask Party since 2007 has, enjoyed decided voter count of as high as 67%, as low as 53%. And so it's sort of contracted in September and October and into the new year here. So, certainly some things took place perhaps that altered people's perspectives at the moment in time.
Now I want to go to you, Sam, and to Nathaniel. What do you think is behind this closing gap? Sam, I'll start with you. What's going on here?
Probably one of the most million-dollar questions we'll have today. I think to look on sort of the bright side of what I see in, that 33% of the undecideds, I think that there has been a longevity in the Sask Party that has had a lot of positives to it. I think about Donna Harpower, who's I guess officially now not our finance minister, but I think the longest female serving cabinet minister in the country at this point. And so there's been some strong points to having the length of term that this government has seen. However, people get tired, people want change, issues come up that people feel aren't being dealt with. It's cost of living, it's housing and availability of that housing, and mental health and the economy. So those are sort of the issues that everybody's looking at. I think it's undeniable to say that any of us aren't feeling it in one way or another. I think everybody could have a healthcare story. Everybody could talk about how much butter costs at the grocery store. So what I'm kind of looking for is the NDP has had change because they haven't been in government, right? They keep working to renew themselves, to build, to grow. They've continued to have a strong slate of candidates. I think they've got 61 nominated. So does the Sask Party. I'm not sure how hard they've been working on either side, but what I have seen from some of the candidates in the Saskatchewan Party in particular is that they are working really hard. I don't know the exact number.
Like harder than the last election?
It's I'm talking mostly the new ones, right? Like there's more than I think 25, 30. My numbers are off because I didn't bring that with me, but there's a lot of them that have knocked their constituencies twice over already. They're coming to people's doors and they really want to talk, and that kind of renewal in the Sask Party maybe hasn't been seen as you're alluding to in the past, and so change is being foisted on them. And the Premier has said that he's looking forward to what that change brings, because it's really going to be a new caucus, assuming the Sask Party is elected. So I'm happy to see that hard work is happening and that change is sort of coming.
I have a million follow-up questions, but I'll go to Nathaniel first. Nathaniel, what do you think is behind the closing gap here between the two parties?
Well, I think what Lang said and what Sam said, I don't have anything necessarily to disagree with there. But perhaps what I'd add, and I think, to Sam's point about renewal within the Sask Party, that's one way of framing it. I think others may see that as sort of Saskatchewan voters might see Saskatchewan's own, or Scott Moe's insiders, his cabinet, his caucus. He's losing popularity with them and they're resigning or they're stepping aside. And so that sort of signals to voters that, maybe there is a question of leadership in the Sask Party. There hasn't been in the past. At the same time, over that past year, I think is the point of reference, Carla's a new leader. More people are getting to know Carla. And I think what the polling shows to me is that the more people get to know Carla and understand Carla and get a vibe check from Carla, the more they like her. And we can sort of see that in the polls. And as I think it's table stakes. Women voters and suburban voters are table stakes for the NDP this time around. And so, Carla, I think, appeals to those voters in a way that perhaps Scott Moe doesn't, and in a way that previous NDP leaders haven't appealed. Further, I think, after a government gets after about 10 years old, time is against them. And so alternative parties, if they can sort of demonstrate that they're an alternative, that's the ball's kind of in their court to make that pitch. And I think Carla Beck's been able to do that in a way that previous NDP leaders haven't been able to, and we can see that in that razor thin margins you talk about in some of the public polling we've seen.
Okay, I do want to play a bit more from the pollster before we go too far. You were laughing, Sam, through that, and I do have a million follow-up questions, but I just want to get a bit more context on this polling because it's interesting. So let's hear a bit more from Lang McGilp.
Well, I think, again, turning to the issues, there are people who are very much concerned about healthcare. Like amongst people who choose to vote NDP, 75% of them, so 3 out of 4 are saying healthcare is one of my top 3 issues. And for the not sure voters, it's 2 out of 3, so 66%. For Sask Party voters, it's only 1 out of 2. So obviously healthcare is important to all of us. It affects everybody, but particularly I think that's one where we're seeing it. And then again, as I mentioned, the education side, that's where we see the biggest division in the issues. 56% of NDP voters say education is in my top 3, whereas only 19% of Sask Party voters are feeling that way. So I think people who feel passionate about those topics might be looking to move from the Sask Party.
With that in mind, Sam, how is the Sask Party trying to position itself in this election? So based on everything you just said, based on what we heard from Lang about what people care most about, what is the message that the Sask Party is trying to get across right now? And I can just imagine how challenging that is. They've been in power for 17 years. There's an appetite for change. So what are they offering?
I think what the Sask Party is offering is a continued champion of our province, in particular our agriculture sector, our resource industry. They set up a number of offices across the world to sort of promote Saskatchewan. And I think that turns into what is our jobs and our economy and the people that are coming here and all of those things. I also think that they have done a number of things to make life more affordable for Saskatchewan. And I know Nathaniel's already writing notes about how they've done things that actually don't do that. But I think it spoke volumes that the Premier on the campaign kickoff day announced the income tax cuts, taking, I think, an additional 50,000 people off the tax rolls. That's powerful. That's impactful. And for me, I've done a number of these conversations over the last couple of months, and I have been saying I am looking for the Sask Party to sort of talk more about the heart and people and sort of the social services issues and things like that. And based on yesterday and today, while they're not quite into the social aspect of things, the fact that they've started with income tax cuts and a strengthened graduate retention program give me hope for the party's future. Speaking personally, and I think a number of my friends in this province would agree, the graduate retention program, when Premier Wall first implemented it, was a massive boost for me coming out of university. Sorry to my parents because they actually paid for my education, but I pocketed all that money, but it really did help me get ahead. And so I just think that I'm looking forward to what the rest of the platform is from the Sask Party, because if that's how strong they're starting, I feel like they may check a lot of boxes that Sask Party supporters have been missing and feel sort of that hope and that excitement about the party again.
We're only on day 2, but do we know more about the NDP's platform than the Sask Party's? Like, Nathaniel, I just feel like there were so many announcements prior to the writ actually being dropped, and a lot of them speak to tax cuts, and it feels like the NDP is trying to position itself in the center. So my question for you, Nathaniel, is how do you think the NDP is positioning itself in this election?
Well, I think as both more pragmatic and more responsive to the issues that I think regular people, working people are facing in Saskatchewan. And so I know there's sort of seems to be in the first couple days of the election sort of a war of words on taxes and public finance and those types of things. But I think Carla Beck's you're right in the sense that I think there's been a proposal of a suite of ideas ahead of the official call of the election. I think that was wise. The opportunity for the Sask Party, of course, is that they can sort of keep their powder dry on some of their announcements and tailor those to responding to what the NDP have already said. But I think we've got not necessarily big ideas coming from either party, but I think it's around in a lot of ways what you see for tomorrow and what you're doing to respond to the issues people are facing right now. I don't think that, to answer your question on the NDP, if they're sort of moving to the center, I'm not so much sure if it's sort of like moving to the center, but in a reality that the Sask Party's retreated from the center in a lot of ways, and sort of that I've said before that the mushy middle of voters, who are more likely to switch their vote. I think the Sask Party's abandoned them, and so some of the things that the NDP are doing and saying appeals to those folks. I think it's a pragmatic approach as much as anything.
Sam, what do you think? You were shaking your head in disagreement. Which part about how the NDP is positioning itself?
The NDP's bread and butter forever and ever, amen, including in this election, seems to be solely speaking to the union employees of this province, education, healthcare, and the rest of those folks, the working class. I guess, to me, if they sort of wanted to be more pragmatic, they should be talking about other things. If you listen to Carla's entire speech from the kickoff, that's all she talked about. She did not speak about the economy writ large, our resource sector, jobs, or any of these other things. And I understand that they're trying to speak to the individual person, but there's a lack of a bigger vision and a bigger way to see this province. And so my frustration continually with the NDP is that sort of narrow vision.
I want to ask each of you before we go much further, because we'll talk about Carla Beck's leadership, we'll talk about Scott Moe's. But I just want to know a bit more about each of you and how, like, what's it like to be a party insider during an election?
Oh, boy.
Because, we're all kind of talking quite seriously right now, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about policy, we're talking about issues, but you were laughing when you came in here and you love this stuff. So, So what is it like to be with a party during an election? Sam, maybe I'll start with you.
Politics grabbed me early on. I did a thing called the Forum for Young Canadians where I went to Ottawa and I got to watch Question Period. And you could actually still pick up a telephone to listen to the French translation. But I was just floored. I found it electric and fascinating. And so that's just the direction my life took. I love everything about politics, door knocking, issue discussion, being in the war room during the campaign. Nathaniel probably would agree with me when I say that election time is like Christmas for all of us politicos. And then once Christmas is over, it's like, oh, now we have to govern.
And how did you end up with the party that you chose? Like, what were your politics leading up to that? How did you pick the Sask Party as being an insider with them?
It's a nice little story. I originally was sort of brought under the wing of Carol Skelton, who was a Conservative member of Parliament at the time.
Yeah.
She came to dinner with all us kids when we were in Ottawa, and we hit it off, and so she brought me in, and it was an election after that. So I started door knocking and ended up actually being Kelly Block's constituency assistant when she was first elected. But I was ready for something bigger and a change. And so Carol's daughter, Terry Harris, who's now Terry Strunk, was Brad Wall's chief of operations, had been with him forever. So she called Terry. Terry interviewed me. And within a couple of weeks, I actually took a job in Regina in the Premier's office. And the rest was history. Ooh. But what I discovered was that I really appreciated the Saskatchewan Party perspective. And I really liked that they governed for Saskatchewan. I'd never really felt that about a party, and so I would probably never call myself a Conservative, and I actually feel like the older I get, the closer to the left I go, but I will never vote NDP. So here I am, okay. Saskatchewan Party.
Okay, Nathaniel, what's your story? I want to hear your side of being a political insider.
Okay, well, I've always had a great interest in politics. As a young person, lots of discussion about politics in my house growing up. Not from a partisan perspective. Like there were no partisans in my household. I don't even know if my parents told each other who they voted for aside, but they would talk about politics. I got more heavily involved, I think, in university, and I realized I disqualified, I think, right-leaning or conservative politics as something that aligned with me. And then my friend Kevin, actually, he may be listening. Thanks, Kevin, but. He dragged me to a Saskatchewan Young New Democrats event, sort of like at the 11th hour in Saskatoon, and he sort of framed it as like a lot of fun and some booze and some good times. And so I hauled away to that in Saskatoon, and I've never really looked back. And I think what sort of solidified it for me was just, I feel like politics is about fairness, or like governments should be about fairness and, being able to raise all ships. And I think that that's sort of what has set me in with the NDP. I see them as being able to provide the best options and futures and economic situation to provide for everyone.
Okay. Interesting stories, both of you. Before we get to our news break, why don't we bring in a caller quickly who can share their perspective. So Dave is on the line right now in Regina. Hey there, Dave.
Hey, Alicia. I just want to know who Scott Moe thinks he's kidding. Obviously, he thinks he's kidding the people of Saskatchewan. Literally one half of his sitting MLAs, including one-term cabinet ministers, are not running again. I mean, I got a list of things here a mile long that I could regale you with about Scott Moe's government, the handling of the Speaker, Randy Weeks, the unnecessary marshals program, us breaking the law, the conduct of Jeremy Harrison and Jeremy Cockrell. But one half of his MLAs are not running again. In fact, your guest Sam there said that she's a former Sask Party operative, and she's now working for Gordon Wyant's bid to become mayor of Saskatoon. Good for her. But I just think that, people like me might have our reasons for not supporting the Sask Party, and I certainly won't be. But I'm wondering just why one half of Scott Moe's caucus has left him. And I'm not talking about Nadine Wilson, And I'm not talking about two or three others that got themselves in disgrace, Ryan Domator and Greg Lawrence. I'm talking about the rank and file, sit down, do the daily work constituency MLAs who are not running again. Some of them are new. Some of them probably decided not to enter a contest for a nomination. I realize that some of them are possibly veterans, but I just think that if they're not going to support Scott, or not going to run for Scott Moe again, even some of them in what would have been known as safe seats, why on earth would anybody else vote for them? Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for calling. I'm Alicia Grabinski. This is Blue Sky. Today we're talking about the election campaign. It is day 2, and we've got 2 former party insiders, one who was connected to the Sask Party, one connected to the NDP, and we're hoping you will call us and share with us the issue that matters to you most. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. So the caller, Dave, there's Sam, talking about how Scott Moe has lost many of his key people. And we could speculate, and I think we've kind of covered that ground. What I'm interested in asking you is, who's attracted to the party now? When you go to party events, who's there? Are those people reflected in the slate of candidates that we see? Like, who is the new cohort of Sask Party supporters and insiders and candidates if we've lost this big chunk of people?
Well, first, I just want to say a little bit on Dave's call. I hear him, and I think everybody has seen that. What I would say is that, again, a government that's long in the tooth inherently becomes guilty of complacency. I remember actually John Gormley, before he was actually officially off air, saying when a friend of mine, Sean Wilson, unseated an incumbent in Kenora Pelly, that all of you guys better be paying attention and getting to work. And I hadn't heard anybody speak that frankly about the government or the party, and he wasn't wrong. So I think what we're seeing now is a massive engagement from our newcomer and cultural communities, Pakistani, Ahmadiyyan, Nigerian communities. It's very much a diverse group of folks. Oddly, the people who are volunteering at a lot of the party nomination events are still, the Caucasian, the traditional grandmas and grandpas that have been in the party forever, and some of my friends. So sorry, Sarah, you're not a grandma, but it's very different. It's really expanded. It's really grown, and those folks have big communities. They are engaged. They talk, and that's sort of, we call it in the current mayoral campaign, voter pools, right? They're very different than they used to be, and engaging with them is a whole new ballgame, but it's been fantastic. And so what I said actually last week to Nathaniel was that if anybody is going to be unhappy about the turnout of this election, they should look themselves in the mirror, because it's the ones that are getting involved that are going to shape it. And like it or not, that's the way it's going.
Yeah. Nathaniel, how do you think the NDP is responding to the makeup of Saskatchewan right now? How is it doing as a party and reflecting the diversity that we see here? Who's coming to NDP party events now?
Right. Well, a couple things, I guess. First, I'd note, I think, what, for lack of a better term, cultural communities, I think, are sort of becoming more and more prevalent and influential in both of the political parties. And we can see in sort of the diversity of candidates that both parties have put up for election this time. But who's coming to NDP events right now? If I can be frank, it's former Sask Party supporters and even Sask Party MLAs, including the likes of Randy Weeks and Mark Docherty, who have joined the opposition in town halls and registering their dissent against the incumbent government. And so I think it just goes back to the point about, I think the Sask Party's universe is getting smaller. And the NDP is kind of eating that lunch right now. And that's why we've got this, what I would call Beckmentum, playing out in the polls. I think.
Just say that again. Beckmentum?
Beckmentum. I think there's Beckmentum. I don't think in 25 years there's been, poll after poll after poll that shows the Sask Party and the NDP statistically tied. So I would call that Beckmentum. And I think it reflects as much to how people like Carla Beck as much as they are starting to lose interest and, in fact, even trust in Scott Moe.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Carla Beck then before we get to more callers, because there was a political scientist on the morning show, and I think that was just yesterday, also talking about Carla Beck and how the party is positioning her, and I find this really interesting. So I'll just let Greg Peltzer say it. Let's listen.
I actually think Carla Beck is probably the most politically astute leader they've had since Lorne Calvert, and as Chuck's talking about carving out that center lane, there's a big appetite in Saskatchewan. We've seen this in a couple of polls over the last 2 or 3 years that most Saskatchewan voters are somewhere in the center for Saskatchewan, and she's really occupied that. And you look at if you look at her platform, she almost looks more fiscally conservative than the Sask Party, and even flipping that whole narrative of the carbon tax, like the gasoline tax. I think it'd be tough for Scott Moe now to go and say, cut the gasoline tax. But you've been very smart. And even where they tried to bait Carla Beck, like on gun control, that private members bill and things like that, she hasn't taken the bait. This is somebody that's pretty darn street smart. And I think that's going to help the NDP in this election.
Okay, so that's Greg Peltzer, political scientist at the U of S. Chuck, that he's referring to is Charles Smith from the U of S. But there's something else that he said. Let's listen to one more clip.
Well, for the Sask Party, they've really got it pound out that, when you look at the rest of Canada, Saskatchewan relatively is doing well, and it's this steady as she goes kind of approach. And I think they need to take the calm demeanor, and then in the debate, I think this is going to be critical for Scott Moe. He's got to keep composure and not get in any kind of shouting or, up the temperature. I think that's deadly important for him. For the NDP, reaching out, taking that center lane and going centrist, not center left. They go centrist and focus their resources on the North PA, Moose Jaw, and the cities. That's where they should pile 95% of their resources. And just Carla Beck is a farm gal, and she can swing a baseball bat and drink a pill. That matters in Saskatchewan, and I think she's kind of like a female Tim Walz in that respect, and I think that's what she's got to get out there with.
Charles?
Yeah, I think the NDP is going to want to emulate what happened in Manitoba, right? So the Wab Canoes campaign focused on improving social services, healthcare, education. The economy in Manitoba is very similar to Saskatchewan, and there's a lot of similarities anyway. And Greg's right, the economy is doing well, although not great, and unemployment's been up a bit in the last year or so. I think Scott Moe wants to campaign on the economy and the economy only, and doesn't want to have to answer for all the other things that I think his government is starting to show signs of age and arrogance. The Randy Weeks allegations, and just the fact that for the first time since I've been following this party, we're seeing real cracks in what's happening behind in caucus, where you've got a disunified caucus, and one could question Scott Moe's leadership on those fronts. And I think those are openings for Carla Beck and the NDP that I think are really going to make this campaign interesting.
And Greg Peltzer speaking to Saskatoon Morning's Stephanie Massicott. Nathaniel, what stood out to you from that?
Well, as someone who has a massive political crush on Tim Walz, I think Carla Beck should take the comparison to him as a huge compliment. I think that's honestly what I feel, and I think that's what lots of voters see. They they see someone who's pragmatic, who's responsive to the issues of the day. And damn it, there's a group of voters out there that are see Carla, and they see themselves in Carla. There's a lot of women that have been, I think that sort of see something extra special in this opportunity, this election. And so I think that Carla's been able to appeal to that, along with her common sense. She's somebody people want to go drink a beer with. And I don't know if I would necessarily want to go have a beer with Scott Moe. And I think somebody wise once said to me too, like, the winners of an election campaign, whether it's like an electoral victory, but whoever, the winners are the leaders who are having the most fun. And I think you see Carla Beck having fun. And as someone who's green to, running in an election campaign, I think she's done a pretty good job at having fun so far.
That baseball ad. Sam, are you buying what Carla Beck is putting out there, that she's a rural farm kid who can swing a bat and drink a pill? Is that messaging getting across to people? Curious your thoughts on that.
I can't honestly answer if it's getting across to people because my people are not Carla people.
Yeah.
It's just there's a gulf, like truly a gulf between the two parties, really. But what I will observe and say about Carla is that as somebody who is, a back end kind of Batman, as we call ourselves, strategically running campaigns, the NDP have done themselves a great service, and I think who they've brought in to run this campaign for them. I think that they also hired Ron Stiles, who was a former long-time bureaucrat in the public service for the province. So whether you liked that baseball ad or not, everybody talked about it.
That's right.
That was a masterstroke, and I have to give them huge props. I still think it was weird that they shot it in a studio, but I also understand why.
I did not know until we were talking about the video that she really is a really good baseball player. Like that, I didn't know that until the ad.
Yeah, she's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, Saskatchewan Baseball Hall of Fame. I think I wouldn't say I think admittedly she's not a great baseball player, but she certainly has played a lot of baseball. I think
that's what I would call my skills.
Okay, but here we are talking about it.
Here we go. That's right.
We're dwelling on it here. So.
Can I just add a little bit? I think she has done a pretty good job of humanizing herself. I think that the NDP still waited too long to brand her. The Sask Party made a clear choice to just not do that job for them, and I think they missed an opportunity, much like the federal Liberals have done as well. They haven't been selling themselves very well. And I think if I were to talk a little bit about maybe why some of the, MLAs and people have left the party or maybe aren't coming out, when I joined the Sask Party and moved to Regina, what I really appreciated about Premier Wall was that he was willing to admit if something wasn't right or if things were, not going that great. And I think that the Premier now, Premier Scott Moe, has maybe shown a bit of a lack of contrition, right? Thinking back to Dave's call, that is a long list of things that nobody can deny have happened and are real.
That's right.
And, watching what happened with Randy Weeks, Scott standing by Jeremy Harrison, even as a party supporter, those are hard things to stand by and watch and defend.
Yeah. And I just would I think respond to that point too, that what I liked about Brad Wall as an amazing politician was that even though I didn't agree with him on much, there were times when he would sort of make a decision. There'd be some pushback, and he'd change his mind every now and again, and I think that's what sort of made him seem real. And so we don't have that in Scott Moe right now. I don't think there's that sort of contrition or that humility that people sort of expect from just kind of meat and potato style politics here in Saskatchewan.
Let's go to another caller. So we've got Stefan on the line in Saskatoon. Hey there, Stefan. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, thanks very much. I moved from Alberta in 1997, and one of the reasons why I moved here was there was definitely a promise within my industry at the time. And I came, and it felt like I was swimming against the stream. I was like a salmon, and there was this flood of people coming. And it was kind of confusing to me because I got here, and I looked around, and I thought, wow, what an absolutely amazing place. It reminded me of Edmonton when I was growing up. It had kind of the forward momentum of Calgary. It was small, centristic. There was not a lot of crime. Things were really going kind of steady Eddie. Now, I do realize that we were in the middle of a boom in Alberta at the time. And so it didn't take long working with those people in Alberta who were coming, young people in particular, in restaurant jobs and places where I worked. And they were going to school, but they were also often going off to work in associated businesses that had to deal with the petroleum boom. That is why people left Alberta. It wasn't because of the politics of some government. Small business, to some degree, was suffering. There was a stagnancy, but that was an overall economic stagnancy you would have found anywhere in the country at the time. Now, I was actually approached when the Sask Party was formed, based on my scholastic and other activities, to run for the Sask Party as an MLA when they were forming. I went to a rally in Moose Jaw, and I watched Premier Wall at the time, or the incumbent Premier Wall, as he was forming the party, speak. And I went with a very large group of heated, young, fresh individuals who had just graduated from school, and they wanted to go and see what he had to say. They were all enthused. We drove back from that rally, and they asked me, well, what'd you think? And my jaw hit the floor. I could I could cut through all of the hype, and I was able to see optically what the message was, and the message was clear. Resource sector only. There was very little talk about even agriculture. There was a lot of things on his agenda that actually did not fit with me, and I chose at that moment to actually distance myself. I also am not partisan. I'm actually not even a Canadian. At the time, I was playing with that and playing with entering politics because I'd studied it. And it just made sense to me to kind of sit back and see what this party evolved into. Now we sit here, and I noticed that all of the progress that this province has seen since I moved here, none of it has actually been within the control of this government, within the Wall government.
An interesting point, Stefan.
All of it has been based on resources, and it's all been based on commodity markets that we have very little control over. And yet, these parties are taking absolute credit for it. Everything else is crumbling.
Stefan, thanks for calling. I appreciate it. And the comments you just made are similar to an email we got. So Ken writes, my understanding is that Saskatchewan became a have province under Lauren Calvert. Is the prosperity that we now have more due to commodity prices and the royalties related to them than the fiscal management of the current governing regime? That email comes to us from Ken. You can email to bluesky@cbc.ca or give us a call on Talkback, 1-800-716-2221. Let's go to another caller. Kathy's on the line in Regina. Hey there, Kathy.
Well, hello. It's so good to talk to people across the province here. I am getting really tired of hearing people talk out of both sides of the mouth at the same time. I would like a little clarity, particularly with Scott Moe, who is so good about supporting rural Saskatchewan. It doesn't take long for him to talk about agriculture. Although, just as the last speaker made the case, we certainly rely more on resource revenue than agriculture these days. Farms are getting bigger. They're not affordable for young people to move out and get settled on their own, by the sellout of land to larger corporations. Again, that's a more the corporate status. But it also means with our population that we are having a smaller and smaller rural population. And with that, it is also an older population. But they are good about saying we want our people to grow up, come back, and live in rural communities. But we know that that takes youth moving away from rural areas to get training elsewhere. And if they don't have that good training here in the province, then they will go elsewhere. The odds of them returning are less likely. So I don't see Scott Moe making the link between what happens in cities and what happens in rural Sask. Families know when their youth return back home and they talk about their experiences living in areas where they get training, that's when they will hear and talk about the problems of homelessness, social systems that are not supporting people well, and really difficult social problems in cities. It's all related.
You raised some good points, Kathy. I want to put that to Sam to find out from her perspective how the Sask Party is tackling issues that are maybe more urban. So, Kathy, thank you for calling. I appreciate it.
Because they are the same. One follows the other. But to just hive off one point of it is not a fair conversation.
Okay. Kathy, thanks. Yeah, thanks. That's Kathy joining us. I think she was calling from Regina. Sam, what do you think?
That was a big topic. I think so. One of the past lives that I had was working for the Saskatchewan Realtors Association. So I happen to now know a lot of realtors, and from everything that I have heard and seen, the rural real estate market, particularly where it's close-ish to one of our bigger cities or towns, or there's a canola plant or, mining or something like that, real estate is still booming in smaller towns. Stock is low even in places like Watrous. So I think that there is, whether or not the government is supposed to be doing that or not, some activity and action happening in our rural cities and towns. I think the safety piece has been an interesting one to watch. I don't really want to get into the martial discussion, but safety across our entire province and across the entire country has been an issue. And so I think I can appreciate why the Sask Party has spent the time focused on, the Marshal Service and sort of changing some of the rules around safety out there. But I'm a city kid through and through, and so I can't speak to that with a lot of intelligence beyond what I've shared.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Nathaniel.
No, yeah, I was just on the conversation around sort of like, I think, generally rural vibrancy, I think, is sort of the theme I got from the previous caller. I grew up in a small town in southeast Saskatchewan, and the sort of economic engine then, and continues to be now, working on the farm or working in the oil and gas sector. And if you didn't do those, and I think this is an opportunity missed by Scott Moe, and is investment. Some of the best jobs in town where I grew up were public sector jobs. There were jobs at the health center and there was jobs at the school. Teachers, nurses, educational assistants, doctors, continuing care aides. And we've underinvested in that. And I think the best thing that a government could do was to properly invest and sort of figure out how we don't have enough teachers and educational assistants in Saskatchewan, for example, where I see postings for, 0.3 continuing care aid jobs or LPN jobs in my hometown of Gainsborough, for example, which is like, that's not going to attract people there. But a full-time position you could start creating jobs and start sort of investing back in Saskatchewan through just a good investment in healthcare and education, because those are also those are women-dominated jobs too, and it creates good economic outcomes for women and families if we can invest in those sectors in rural and urban Saskatchewan.
I just want to add just to this kind of conversation, just the housing shortage across the province. How do we better incentivize smaller towns to build some of these houses and places for people like the nurses that we are recruiting and things like that? Because sometimes I've heard stories where we actually do have the recruitment in place and somebody's coming, but there's nowhere for them to live without having to drive. So there are definitely challenges. There are growth challenges, but we need to make sure we're ahead of it. And right now we're really behind.
I want to switch to a different issue. So Keith writes, we're in a climate and biodiversity emergency, and without a healthy environment, there will be no economy. The Sask Party is anti-environment. So Sam, I want you to pick up on that. Any sense of where the Sask Party is at when it comes to environmental policies? Will we hear announcements? How are they doing on that front?
The environment has always been sort of a polarizing conversation with the Saskatchewan Party. I'm a millennial, and so, I believe in climate change. I do like some of what the government has done. Carbon capture, sequestration, there's debate on whether that's a real thing. But one of the things actually that Premier said yesterday in his scrum after announcing the campaign kickoff was he talked about how environmentally sustainable or friendly a lot of our agricultural practices are compared to most other producers in the world. And I didn't even realize that. And so I think where the future is in sort of making sure we are doing our duty to protect the environment and reduce our emissions, I think the carbon tax doesn't work. But if we continue to focus on research in agriculture and a lot of those adjacent industries, I think we can really make an impact, and I think a lot of that's already happening.
And do you think we'll hear more of that from Scott Moe? I mean, we're hearing it from Sam right now, but do you think it's a top priority for him?
If you look at the polling, it's not a priority for anybody.
That's right. So that's interesting. Yeah,
I think when I looked at the poll from Abacus, you can maybe go to Nathaniel, but I'm not even sure any of that even was registered.
Nathaniel, what are your thoughts on that? Because as Sam points out, and I think it's fair to say, the carbon tax is not popular, and we're seeing conversations at the federal level where there's been a shift, even from parties where you would expect them to support fully the carbon tax. Sure. And the NDP here has tried to make its stance clear that they're not in support of it. So what's your take?
That's right. Yeah, I mean the Saskatchewan NDP, I think, has been at least more bolder or clear in the position on the opposition to the carbon tax, and that while a nice idea, perhaps, a concept of a plan, we may hear in other political realms, it's not working in Saskatchewan for certain, and it's certainly not popular for a majority of people. Personally, I'm very excited about the opportunities we can to combat climate change and those types of things, but when it comes to the carbon tax, I've yet to see any data that demonstrates that it's actually working. Aside from redistributing wealth, which if we want to have that conversation, I'm as a New Democrat more than happy to have. But I think that there's alignment between both parties, and I think I'll use the term NDP boogeyman around things like the economy and resource economy isn't resonating anymore. And I think Carla's done a good point of insulating herself from that. As you note, just one more quick thing on this piece is that when I was working for the NDP and Carla became the leader, I've been through a lot of leadership races in my short career in politics, and we've had a lot of, and so, leaders elected, and then there's an attack. Immediately, Sask Party comes out to frame them. And we kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And there's never been a good, solid land on an attack. In fact, I don't even know if the Sask parties really tried, aside from sort of this tangential link to sort of Justin Trudeau through Jagmeet Singh. It's kind of all very complicated. But Carla's been kind of Teflon as far as some of the traditional attacks on the NDP from the Sask Party.
Okay. I want to get a caller in. One more, just very quickly here. So Gordon in Saskatoon joins us right now. Gordon, you've only got about 30 to 45 seconds. What do you want to share today?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to concur with your lady guest speaker there. I didn't catch her name. I think it's Sam, right?
Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, anyways, I 100% agree with the frustration she has towards the NDP. The problem with the NDP is their name is an oxymoron. They are not new. They've had the same withering mantra for years that discusses nothing but union, healthcare, education, and now environment. They don't have economic policy. They don't have policy on jobs. And because of that, they lack the vision, and they can't govern the province or demonstrate they can govern the province without vision. And need a visionary to lead the province. Now, my frustration with that is that I used to be a member of the NDP. They need to rebrand and get a visionary to lead that party. That other problem I have with my frustration is that Stop Moe hasn't been doing a great job. So, and the one thing that bothers me the most about this is that there's never been a discussion about who's buying land in Saskatchewan. Prices are going through the roof. We don't know who's buying it. A lot of it's foreign entities. Should that be happening? That should be a major concern, and no one talks about it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you bringing it up on the show today, Gordon. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Get like 10 seconds, Nathaniel.
I'd just say, as far as the rebranding comment of the NDP, this always has come up every time we lose an election. I'd point to the Conservative Party in BC, who have sort of wiped out the rebranded Liberal Party there, and the Saskatchewan Liberal Party that rebranded essentially doesn't exist anymore. I think they're running one candidate. So, while the idea of rebranding is nice, I think it's through the vibe and the leadership, not the name of the party, that's going to make a difference in the NDP.
I'm so mad that you're going to get vibe check in this, and that's all I'm going to remember.
And Beckmentum.
I love it.
Oh boy, that's going to stick.
I can't say that one.
Okay, this has been fun. I'm sure we'll do it again. We've got a few more days until we vote. So Sam, thank you. And Nathaniel, thanks to you.
Very
this
fun.
was fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And if you didn't get on today, you can always call our talkback, 1-800-661-7540. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You've been listening to Blue Sky. Tomorrow on the show, we'll talk to the author of Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in an Age of Impossible Masculinity. I'm raising a boy. You might be too, but we all have men in our lives who are trying to figure out how to be a man at a time when conversations around toxic masculinity swirl. So it should be a great conversation tomorrow on Blue Sky. That's here on CBC Radio 1 between 12 and 1 o'clock. Have a great afternoon.